Today we are in Gravesend. We're at Windmill Hill, and the whole site could probably tell so many different stories in itself. However, for today we're telling a very, very important story based around World War I for the history of Gravesend, and it's involving this. These insignificant concrete markers that are here on Windmill Hill, 3 of them to be exact, tell a fascinating story of a Zeppelin airship. So enjoy your history lesson, and we'll come back to these. So see you in a minute. Bye for now. Gravesend has always been a place that has been vulnerable to attack due to many factors that change throughout its rich history, from being sacked and burnt by Castilian fleets in 1310 through to the threats of Dutch raids, as well as the fear of the ever-present Spanish and French invasions. But Gravesend would experience true terror in the form of the German Zeppelins during World War I. Although the Zeppelin had many flaws as a primitive bomber, such as target accuracy, which was poor due to the height at which the airships flew, and navigation was problematic, but it did have a few advantages, such as travelling long ranges, and its sheer size as it lumbered in the sky like a giant eating through the clouds. It could send fear to people on the ground below, knowing that any second it could release a payload of bombs on the innocents below. Airship raids on Great Britain were approved by the Kaiser on the 7th of January 1915, although he excluded London as a target and further demanded that no attacks be made on historic buildings. The raids were intended to target only military sites on the east coast and around the Thames estuary. So with that in mind, it was on the night of the 4th through to the 5th of June 1915 that Gravesend became a victim of the now infamous Zeppelin raids of World War I. The story starts when, at 11 p.m, Zeppelin L-10, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Klaus Hirsch, came inland between Grain and Eastchurch. Thinking he was dropping bombs on Harwich, instead 4 high explosives and 24 incendiary bombs fell on Sittingbourne and Milton Regis. Slowly making its approach towards London, it would be Gravesend that would be the final stop-off for this bombing raid, when, flying in a figure 8 due to the weather conditions, the Zeppelin dropped numerous high explosives in and around Gravesend, with the 3 incendiaries falling on Windmill Hill, of which is now marked out. It was noted the defence aircraft was slow to chase, with the Zeppelin managing to flee up the Norfolk coast and away. From all the bombs that fell that night, thankfully only 8 were injured. Either way, in the end, the Zeppelin would quickly become a very outdated weapon of war, but for the people on the ground below at the time, seeing one loom overhead would have been a very scary reality. And for the people of Gravesend at the time, this would become a talking point for generations to come. From what I could find, this was the airship's path of chaos and destruction. Okay, so hopefully you enjoyed that amazing bit of history that obviously tells the story of it, but really, as with anything, stories are one thing, but to actually come here and witness it for yourself is obviously another thing. Now I wonder how many of you have come to Windmill Hill before in Gravesend, probably not even past these amazing little concrete blocks, which basically symbolise, as it says on here, the incendiaries, the 3 incendiaries that were dropped here on that fateful, well, technically night really, because it was the 4th of June up to the 5th of June. And then you can imagine what's really, to put this all in context, come with me. So you've got to imagine that the Zeppelin itself is coming from this direction, and it's already made its way around, and now it's swooping over, and now we're talking at night now, so it was noted that it was quite a sort of I think the moon was out, and obviously this huge silver Zeppelin was coming overhead. And because we're on the high point of Gravesend, it probably looked even closer to where it needed to be. And it would have been swooping up through the clouds over here. And then obviously one of its first payloads was here, where these 3 markers were. But really, it's one of its main important targets, strangely enough, in the distance would have been Tilbury on the opposite side of the Thames. So, as it dropped these 3 incendiary bombs, it would then make its way down into the sort of other part of Gravesend, heading into London. And then what it did was it sort of diverted back, and then, and then it came back around and out. So, a very, very scary sight for the locals who would have witnessed this. Fortunately, like I said, there was only those 8 casualties that were mentioned. But my God, what an intimidating sight that must have been as it was sort of coming overhead. But more importantly, like I said, for Gravesend's history, it's so unknown for a lot of people. I can imagine a lot of people in Gravesend probably didn't even know about this story, and yet for the World War I history of this, it also marks an important landscape marker to put a placement as to where these Zeppelin raids were happening, where bombs were being dropped. And obviously, because of these markers, even though how small and insignificant they are, I mean, look, they're tiny. Just these small concrete blocks, almost look like dragon's teeth. And yet, the importance of them can't be underestimated. And as you can see, the beautiful landscape of Gravesend that we can see now, as we're overlooking it, absolutely incredible. And to note that, obviously, like we said before, without going into too much detail, we know that Windmill Hill has been an important focal point for many people of Gravesend throughout the years, including when the raids were happening and when Gravesend had been burnt, that people could witness it from the top of Windmill Hill in the past. But we'll come back to those stories for another day. But here, these incendiary bombs, and then making its way through, constantly just like dropping these bombs as it was going overhead with the light rumble of the engines as it was going over. It really piques the imagination. But what I find so fascinating is that just standing here and overlooking this huge giant of an airship coming right over this way, knowing that it just scattered these bombs, absolutely incredible. And also, like I said before, to conclude, it just proves the point that these tiny little insignificant markers on these tiny little parks that we have really do tell a fascinating story. And that's the most important thing, is to keep these stories alive, to keep the heritage of these amazing historic towns that we have. And obviously, surely that's the most important thing. So let's have one more look around. So let's come with me. So as you know, these markers have seen better days, obviously. But the fact they are still here, and obviously the plate that marks this actual event taking place on the first one, is still a great reminder for you. And hopefully, like I said, this video can shed even more light on that story. And like I said, I can't stress enough the importance of it actually marking out these infamous Zeppelin raids that happened in World War I. So yeah, there we go. Brilliant, wasn't it? These, like I said, insignificant concrete blocks. So, thank you so much for coming along with me. Hope you really enjoyed that story. Hope you really enjoyed the sort of like putting into context of where the Zeppelin came across, where it was sort of aiming towards, where it headed as it sort of swooped around. The fact that it really symbolised how bad these Zeppelins were in terms of weather and everything else. The fact these bombs could be scattered. The airships themselves could be scattered just due to bad weather, which is obviously what was labelled as to why this was such a failure for the Germans at the time, really, when they were trying to bomb Tilbury and rumoured heading in towards London as well. And yet here they landed, and here this huge airship came across on the 4th of June. and then scattered across up until the 5th, and then made its way back round. Amazing story, isn't it? So thank you so much for coming along with me. Feel free to spread the word of the channel. Much love to all of you out there. And in immortal words of Phoenix history, because history matters, and it really does, doesn't it? Take care, everybody, and I'll see you all very soon. Goodbye for now.